Hello everyone, Laura K. Buzz here, and this is a quick little accessibility review slash overall review for Hellblade 2 Senua Saga. Um, I'm not doing a full, regular, edited accessibility episode about this, not because I don't think it deserves it, but just because this week's schedule is a little bit chaotic with trying to finish final deadlines for the Accessibility Summer Showcase that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So I just wanted to jump in, show you some stuff, casually talk, and at some point in this, I might, switch to reading from, a written review script, but this is me just sort of throwing something together because I want to talk about this game. So very quickly to start off, this is an accessibility menu that appears on first boot up of the game. That's really cool. We see this a lot from PlayStation. We don't often see it from Xbox first-party games. I will note, it's great that there's menu narration, but it defaults to off. And I don't know if it defaults to on perhaps if you have menu narration turned on in your system settings, but as it currently stands as someone that doesn't use menu narration, it defaults to off and you have to
On.
turn it to on to know that there's menu narration, which isn't ideal. Best practice is to just, no matter what, default your menu narration to on, just so that if someone needs it, they know it's there and they don't accidentally miss it. Other stuff that's available on this first boot, basic stuff like, are you listening through headphones? What's your volume? Do you want subtitles on? Language? Text size, we have a larger text size option, and it affects UI and menu text as well, which is great. Background animations in menus, if you find those distracting. And color scheme, so you can invert the colors, or make them higher contrast, or grayscale everything, or do grayscale inverted, or light. It's great that these options are here, and I'm glad that there is stuff on first boot. There is also a colorblind mode available, or, well, there's three. There's Deuteranope, Protanope, and Tritanope. I apologize if I mispronounce those. Those are the three most common types of colorblindness that exist. Glad to see them offered, settings offered for them, and you can change the intensity of those filters. Always good practice. So here we go, Hellblade 2 Senua Saga. Couple of things to note quickly. There is a 20-minute, I believe, little documentary here about psychosis, and specifically, talking with people who have psychosis who did consultation on the game. I kind of wish that this documentary gave a little bit more time to the people with psychosis to directly talk about their own experiences, more so than the university professor that does research on psychosis, who talks about it from a third-party perspective. But I do think there is some really good stuff in there in terms of it reassured me as a player that psychosis was being, told from a perspective of lived experience. But it also gave some good examples, like there's that psychological there's that optical illusion where if you turn a mask around on a turntable with light facing it the right way, when the mask is facing away from you, it will still look like it's facing towards you because brains are hardwired to see patterns and particularly to recognize faces. And that was a really good example. They tied that to how psychosis works in terms of visual hallucinations, and I think that was a really good, understandable, digestible example to point to. There's also a Hellblade, the story so far, a little 5-minute recap. This plays as default when you start playing the game anyway, so, yeah. Okay, this is the bit of this review where I'm going to switch over to reading from a review that I sort of wrote in advance of this game, and then we'll sort of talk more in depth about some of the accessibility stuff in a little bit. I'm recording this at the point where reviews are out for the game, so I know that review scores are all over the place. There's people scoring it in the 90s, there's people scoring it in the 50s and 60s out of 100. I definitely fall on the higher end of that scale. If I had to put a number to it, I feel like it falls in the 90 to 95 range for me personally. Hopefully I can sort of explain why I feel that way, while knowing that I'm gonna be in the minority of people who feel this strongly positive about it. So, I'll be honest, when it was announced back in 2019 that Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice was going to be getting a sequel, I was a little bit skeptical. The first game was this solitary exploration of rage and grief through the lens of psychosis, and it felt like a satisfyingly complete narrative on its own. I feel very differently now that I have played Senua's Saga. Where Senua's Sacrifice was a game largely defined by its portrayal of Senua as someone who was consumed by psychosis, experiencing the world through visions more so than through physical reality, Saga kind of reverses that portrayal. While Senua is still clearly subject to hallucinations, they're represented as a layer on top of the physical world, rather than the entirety of her reality. As a result, Saga is a more grounded tale that to me feels more intimate and allows Senua room to navigate the space between where her reality ends and that of those around her begins. Where Senua in the first Hellblade was portrayed as exclusively focused on undoing the death of her lover, in the hopes that doing so would somehow relieve her sense of heartbreak and loss, Senua's Saga portrays Senua as someone who, while still driven in part by feelings of rage and vengeance, is fundamentally defined by a deep sense of empathy for others. While this empathy sometimes manifests as guilt over those she could not save, it can also be seen in the way that she draws parallels between herself and the fear and hate that drives the belief and actions of her enemies. It's rare to see a game in which a protagonist battling a mental health condition is presented as overwhelmingly empathetic towards the safety of strangers. It's rare to see a game in which someone with mental health issues is able to form bonds with others. It's rare to see a game in which characters have perspectives on mental health conditions that don't glorify them as superpowers, but also take the time to see value in them. These are things that Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga manages to pull off impressively well, and that were hugely impactful to me specifically as a person with a number of mental health disabilities. Senua's arc as a character leaves space for her hallucinations to simultaneously be an obstacle that she's wrestling with, and something that's valued by others as a way to look at problems from unexpected perspectives and see unexpected connections in a way that really moved me. Outside of the narrative, the most notable differences seen in Senua's Saga relate to the combat and puzzle systems, which have in my opinion dramatically improved compared to Senua's Sacrifice. While the core flow of combat is largely unchanged in Senua's Saga, with a dodge, light and heavy attacks, and a focus meter allowing time to be slowed, fights are now exclusively 1v1 affairs. In group encounters, enemies will no longer attack Senua from behind, reducing frustration and allowing combat to become more focused on intimate battles. As someone who found the combat in the first Hellblade one of its more frustrating aspects that I kind of wished there was less of, this change in focus really helped me to enjoy the game more and helped to feel like the combat was getting in the way of pacing less. Combat is overall less frequent, more centered on narratively significant moments, and more visually luxurious, all of which I think are to the game's benefit. In particular, the visual effect used during focus, where characters move as though stop motion, really helped to give those moments a very strong kind of emphasis. Additionally, puzzle variety is significantly improved over Senua's Sacrifice, with puzzles centered on spotting a symbol hidden in the environment made less frequent and more forgiving, as well as better signposted. This is great for me as someone who really struggles with spatial orientation and visual memory and imagination. Popping back to real-time lore here, I kind of want to talk about the settings menu because I realized I didn't talk about this up top. I kind of really like this game's approach to how it nestles accessibility menus. So there's no dedicated accessibility menu you can see here in the settings, but let's say I go into audio. The top option for audio is accessibility. So if I don't want, tweaking all the audio volumes or turning on streamer mode to avoid copyrighted music, I can go to accessibility, and this will be audio-specific accessibility stuff, such as menu narration volume, menu narration speed, active sound effects volume, and ambient sound effects volume. You've got a similar situation in basically all of these menus. The difficulty, I left this on dynamic the whole way through. I think it did a good job of customizing the difficulty to balance with what I seemed to be capable of. But you can go into gameplay accessibility and turn down camera bob. You can turn button mashing inputs into button holds or automated. Sprint can be turned to a toggle. Block can be turned to a toggle. Focus can be turned to a toggle. These are some of the more interesting accessibility options on the gameplay front. For both offensive and defensive actions, so for attacking and defending. In default, you push specific buttons to do your various inputs. In simplified mode, you press whatever button and the game will sort of automate the most appropriate action. And then in self-play, the game will automatically carry out all options. So you can basically automate defense entirely or attacking entirely if that's what works best for you. If you just want to progress through a fight and just want to go, I'm really struggling, can you do this fight for me so I can keep going with the story? Graphics, we've got accessibility options including motion blur, colorblind, which we talked about earlier. Controls, fully remappable controls. Input, we've got your basic things like being able to change sensitivity and inversion. Interface, we've got text size, background animations, and color scheme, which we talked about before. But there's also options like menu wrapping, so you can go down from the bottom of a list and scroll back up to the top. And subtitles, I think I skipped over there quickly, which you can change the text size, as well as do you want a directional indicator, which is great. This, if you look at that little text box down the bottom, the lit up corner on the text box tells you that, like, in the top left, that's pointing towards where the text is, the audio is coming from. I think that is a really nice option. Then there's advanced settings, and you can get really in the weeds on changing, like, speaker colors, contrast. Do you want, like, a solid background, a background and an outline, contrast colors, outline thicknesses. There's a lot of good subtitle tweaking options, which I really appreciated. Anyway, back to reading from my, like, pre-written review. Hellblade 2's implementation of subtitles is a really notable improvement over those seen in the first game, with the ability to view multiple subtitles for hallucinated voices simultaneously, mimicking the stereo pan position of their counterpart audio, as well as that smart implementation of speaker directional indicators on the subtitle border outlines I talked about before. While Senua's Saga is comparable in length to the first game, I did find that it kind of felt like it ended a bit more suddenly than its precursor, in part due to its narrative structure. Where the first game was building continuously to one clear goal and crescendo, Saga features a sort of 3-act narrative, splitting the story into more obvious segments. The thing is, without spoiling too much, the final of these segments is notably shorter than the other two, which, to me, contributed to the game feeling a little rushed. Additionally, some of the game's questions about Senua that are brought up very last minute are not really given the same time to breathe as other plot threads. That being said, the decision to bring Senua's adventure more into the physical world than that of her hallucinations considerably blurs the lines between how much of this story is meant to be read as literal and how much is meant to be read as metaphorical. While this was initially a point of mild frustration for me, after sitting with it I do think it's to the story's benefit. There's a palpable tension between Senua's experience of the world and the experience of those who are travelling with her, particularly in terms of the ways that fear-mongering might bridge someone's willingness to trust a seer who seems to be able to see things that you may not, but does seem to be achieving things you don't know how to achieve. While Hellblade 2 is not as focused of a game as the first one was, and has less overall consistent pacing, to me that is more than made up for by a revamping of combat and pattern-seeking puzzles, and a story that allows Senua to interact with other people. I personally found her portrayal as painfully empathetic, simultaneously with her experiences of rage and sorrow, a sorely needed and beautiful backdrop to a visually stunning personal journey. Right, this is me back talking off script a little bit. Yeah, I really want to hammer home that Hellblade 2 is a game that's really going to stick with me. Simplifying some of the puzzle and combat stuff isn't going to be to everyone's tastes, and I think that the story being told here is definitely less of a widely relatable story. I think it's definitely going to be a bit more hit and miss who it works for. But I found something really beautiful in the way that this game portrayed the journey of someone who knows she's living with a mental health condition, but is still trying to navigate living in the same world as people without her condition. And I think a lot of that was deeply personally moving. I want to talk about this game in more depth once it's been out a little bit and I feel like I can talk in spoiler terms about it. Because right now I'm holding back a lot of the things that I think are most interesting about this game in order to not spoil this reasonably short and very narrative-focused experience. But I think there is something really beautiful here, and it's not going to be for everyone, but I'm really glad it's here. as I say, in terms of accessibility, this game isn't going to be playable for most sightless players without sighted assistance, even with text-to-speech menu narration. But I do think that they do some really good stuff, particularly the innovative stuff they do with subtitles for having multiple characters who are meant to be binaurally panned showing up as simultaneous subtitles is really, really a huge step forward accessibility-wise compared to the first game. I love Hellblade 2. I think it is wonderful. I know that's not going to be everyone's take, but I think there is something really special here. There we go. This was a sort of thrown together quick AA episode because I can't do a regular, properly scripted one this week, but I hope you enjoyed, and there will be at least one regular AA episode this week in a couple of days before I get back to being head down working on the Accessibility Summer Showcase coming up on June 7th. Thank you for watching. Bye!